Salamat, Mags. And it's an honor to be here. MinDA is glad to be collaborating from time to time with Kusog Mindanaw. Since our Medco days, way back in the 1990s, insofar as pushing for the advocacies in Mindanao. And my presentation will essentially complement what was broadly provided and presented by RD Popo earlier in terms of the Mindanao economy, but with additional context on the peculiarities of the Mindanao situation. This is where we were prior to COVID, just to situate ourselves what had happened in Mindanao prior to pandemic, and now that we are in the midst of this global situation. Prior to pandemic, we've been performing a lot better than the national average in terms of economic growth. We're growing at an average of 7.1% GRDP. At many times in the last two administrations, or three administrations in fact, starting with the GMA period, that Mindanao had been able to post growth rate that are relatively higher or faster than the national average across 17 regions in the Philippines. Investments inflow in Mindanao in the last 15 years, in fact, had jumped 10 times from where and how much it was many decades or about more than a decade ago. And in terms of tracking our growth trajectory in Mindanao by administration or by presidency, this is where we started in terms of our growth targets and attainment in Mindanao at nearly 4% GRDP at the Ramos administration. Of course, we all know what happened during the entire time of the Estrada administration with the all-out war that had affected millions of our Mindanaoans affected by such conflict. And we've climbed back again to an impressive growth towards 5.21, towards 7.5 average in the last and previous administration, and targeting towards hitting 8% GRDP at the end of the Duterte administration or next year. This is on account of what had happened in Mindanao in the last decade in terms of massive growth of the services and the industry sector that really propped Mindanao's overall economic performance, with many industries rising, malls, hotels, real estate projects, and several other industries that have emerged across key urban areas in Mindanao. And the rise also of many in the services sector that cater to the increasing demand of such services in Mindanao. And with Mindanao also being able to host and continue to host the rising locators, particularly in the ICT industry. Citing the talent and strength of Mindanao, particularly on this sector, plus the improving power situation that Mindanao has been having starting 2015. And we've also definitely had noted expansion of many of our agriculture areas, especially those that are directed towards export market. But these are all the past, because this is what is the reality today. We've all been witness, we've all have seen, and in fact, to a large extent, been affected personally by what is happening today. In fact, without this pandemic, we would have this Kusog Mindanaw activity face-to-face interacting with each other. But because of the limitations of the situation, and here we are doing this virtually. And as was shared early on in the slides of RD Popo, this is how our economy overall nationally had took a deep dive because of the pandemic. In an effort, in a bid of the government to save more lives, the trade-off was our economy being affected with lockdowns, with strict implementation of quarantine measures affecting many of our economic activities at 9.5 negative growth rate full year of 2020. Now, let's move closer to where we were in terms of our economic growth in the past year here in Mindanao. And consistent with where we were in the last several years in terms of our economic performance vis-a-vis the national average, Mindanao relatively posted still a better performance than the national negative growth rate of last year at 5.7%. But still, it's not something we are proud of because it's negative. The red line that we saw, if we wanted to put a face on it, it's not just about our economy. It's personal to us as well. Family members, my mother, my office mate, Director Raytan, Father June Mercado, several other relatives, friends, associates that we are seeing, that we have seen, posted on Facebook with candles almost on a daily basis, reflective of the kind of situation that we are right now. And so this is a dim picture that we are seeing unless we are able to hurdle this particular health crisis. But moving back to where we were in terms of our economic growth, it is the subject of our discussion this morning. If there is one thing that the word positive is most welcome, most encouraged, needs to be propagated across all today, it's the positive growth that we have seen in the agriculture sector. While our industries and services sectors took a deep dive, it was agriculture sector that had given us at least a glimmer of hope in this otherwise dark economic reality that we face today. And in fact, in terms of the gross value added, as was explained also by Article, Mindanao traditionally being a major producer of the country's key agricultural commodities, both for domestic and export orientation. The gross value adding in Mindanao Agri, in fact, had contributed a larger score in terms of the overall GVA output, particularly in the agriculture sector. So where the focus should be, given the context and given the realities we face today, and given the lessons we've learned resulting from the disruptions brought about by the pandemic. Therefore, the need to roll out more of the regional and interregional linkages and logistics hubs by improving so much of our connectivity projects that are still remain to be a major focus for most of our key national agencies, such as the DPWH and the Department of Transportation. The need to bring our agricultural products up the value chain rather than producing mere raw materials or raw agricultural products in most of our rural areas. The need to promote industrial growth and link this to agri-manufacturing. And at the same time, as we emerge out strongly of the pandemic, taking cue on the infrastructure and agriculture twin strategies espoused by the national government, the need to also embrace green economy, sustainability in these approaches. As was stressed in the context earlier by Mags in terms of where Mindanao sits in the overall context of the national agricultural output, we're 36% of the country's farm area, over 43% of the country's food trade, and 36% of the GBA in agriculture sector. 8 out of top 10 exportable commodities in the Philippines come from Mindanao. So when we talked about bananas, where we are second, sometimes fourth in the world, that's Mindanao bananas. If we're talking about canned pineapples, where we are fourth in the world, that's Mindanao pineapples. 99% of rubber is produced in Mindanao, in Basilan, North Cotabato, Zamboanga, Sibugay. However, we sell out, we export our raw rubber kaplam because we do not have rubber processing and rubber manufacturing facilities here in Mindanao. And that is reflective of the all other commodities that we produce in Mindanao that lack the value adding in processing. But nonetheless, for many of our export winners, Mindanao had been able to diversify market destinations. So that if you are in New York, you can buy microwavable Saba banana that is produced and exported by Sagrex from Davao. And so with our sardines that are penetrating Europe, Middle East, and many other countries. And even in the midst of pandemic last year, Mindanao continues to send our commodities abroad. Because even while our market destinations are in lockdowns, they still need to eat our food commodities. So that explains our resiliency in Mindanao during these external global shocks because of our export-denominated agricultural output. However, this is the paradox and the big question mark and the big elephant in the room in many meetings before now in terms of the paradox of agriculture in Mindanao. We are in a land of plenty in terms of agriculture potentials, but in a land of poverty, unfortunately. So Mindanao is host to 9 out of 10 poorest provinces in the country. As you are seeing on the slide, the darker the areas are, the higher the poverty situation. Yes. And these are generally covering the Bangsamoro provinces. And if we go and if look at it by region, this is where we're seeing that poorest of the poor sectors in Mindanao are farmers and fisher folks. So that's the biggest irony that we've been seeing in Mindanao, that in spite of its potentials in the agri sector, it has not created a dent in terms of transforming the lives of many of our rural farmers who are producing and whose output and products and harvests are being bought at farm gate prices way, way lower than how much it should have been because of the lack of connectivity, lack of access to market, and several other factors to be able to seize the opportunities of their agricultural output. Therefore, in terms of looking at the way forward, in the process of identifying what projects should be implemented where in Mindanao, in terms of connectivity, whether road, bridge, airport, or seaport, should be linked to the agricultural productivity so that rural areas and agriculturally producing areas that are also having high poverty incidence can be linked. And if we wanted to look at transforming rural communities, the way forward definitely is to look at connectivity in these areas. And so that farm to market roads should be established to link these commodity specific areas towards national highways and to export gateways, for instance. So the need to overlay poverty situation, our commodities in Mindanao, and the kind of projects that will have to be implemented. This, in fact, should be the rationale and the basis by which national government identifies and prioritizes projects to be implemented in Mindanao, especially in the context of build, build, build. Moving on further, our challenge, not just in Mindanao, but all across the Philippines, is our fragmented farming setup. 5 hectares here, 10 hectares there, 20 hectares somewhere else, and therefore the lack of consolidation is not making it competitive because we don't have the economies of scale. Our agricultural output had to be consolidated and integrated so that it will warrant the viability of the private sector putting up value-adding facilities and manufacturing for these commodities to reach not just domestic but export destination. This is what we hope to accomplish by identifying agri-eco zones in Mindanao, where very specific commodities can be consolidated and integrated, matched with the right kind of infrastructure and post-harvest facilities, so that it can be delivered to specific market destinations. And therefore, the need to link all of this to the entire corridors of development, infrastructure development in Mindanao. Looking at the connectivity of our highways to the farm-to-market roads. The challenge, however, is that we have about more than 270,000 national roads in Mindanao. Around nearly more than 90% are already paved, or 95% paved. But we still have so much of the rural roads that are yet to be paved, only at around 30%. Yung mga magko-connect sa mga farm areas to the highways, yun yung kinukulang tayo. Moving forward under our DPWH activities and projects, together with DA, together hopefully next year with the implementation of the Mandanas ruling, where we hope an economic or a financial windfall shall befall upon many of our local government units, averaging 25 or 27% increase in their IRA, should be devoted towards these very specific road connectivity projects that are otherwise already devolved at the local level and can no longer be implemented by DPWH or the national board. Moving on further, the need to establish where the strengths are in terms of our commodities. And this is one undertaking right now that we are doing with World Bank that will hopefully turn into a project proposal for World Bank funding, particularly in terms of connectivity projects to enhance agriculture value adding in Mindanao. And so that the green spots that we are seeing are where the specific commodities are and should be directly linked to our highways along initially in this first phase, the entire corridor stretch of General Santos to Davao and Cagayan de Oro, and with spur lines in the succeeding phases to be able to really look at realistically connecting many of our agricultural areas to our national highways. And the need for this to be supported with all other big ticket projects espoused under this administration under a program we call Build, Build, Build. But this is something that have yet to be seen in terms of accomplishments, because while we've seen quite a number of Mindanao projects identified under the Build, 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 many of these have yet to see completion. Some of these have yet to even be started, have yet to be started. And if we, for instance, take a look at the Mindanao Railway, Mindanao leaders, and supported by RDC 11, for instance, have espoused and endorsed the two-track electric powered railway, the first ever railway in Mindanao. But what came out when it was approved was a one-track, single-track, diesel-powered railway. So what we wanted to drive out in this particular context and reality is that even if we have supposedly an expectation of a Mindanaoan president, it is not automatic that we would be getting what we desire in Mindanao, because the policy remains the same. Every project proposal from its region via the RDC still goes up to a national capital, where it is being evaluated and assessed and approved. And whether or not there is going to be a corresponding budget to that is left as well on the assessment, determination, and the decision of the DBM at the national capital. That's why in many of these efforts, we leverage on the specific strengths of Mindanao to get into the viability of these projects, particularly looking at the corridors approach, where many of our development partners, such as ADB, World Bank, JICA, had also considered the corridors development approach as basis for prioritizing key projects in Mindanao. ADB in 2012 did a study on the Western Mindanao corridor, and 2 years later that resulted to a $320 million of connectivity projects stretching way up to Tawi-Tawi in terms of 3 bridges will have to be built, looking at the entire Western Mindanao corridor. So the same approach is now being considered by development partners in terms of prioritizing and making sense in so far as big ticket projects in Mindanao. Because at the end of the day, in terms of planning, in terms of context, we have to look at where is Mindanao in the larger sphere of BIMP, IAGA, and ASEAN. So we're not just looking at Visayas and Luzon as point of reference in terms of our growth, in terms of our infrastructure, but where we are in terms of our positioning to the larger market in ASEAN, which is nothing new. Because centuries ago, even before Philippines became a republic, even before Magellan discovered Philippines, Mindanao is already economically and socioculturally integrated with our neighbors in ASEAN, particularly the BIMP, IAGA. And the bigger prospects for Mindanao getting into BIMP, IAGA, and ASEAN and penetrating bigger market destinations because of the global trading arrangements being made favorable for such economic multi-country understanding. And that's why as we now assume chairmanship of the BIMP, IAGA for this year, we will take stock on around $21 billion worth of priority infrastructure projects across 4 countries in the focus areas of BIMP, IAGA. So in the case of the Philippines, it's Mindanao and Palawan. So we are leveraging our business case and viability of Mindanao projects to its relationship in the BIMP, IAGA, because this is how we would want to look at it. What is Davao Airport, Davao Port, Zamboanga Airport, and Zamboanga Airport in the context of the airport in our neighbors, such as Kota Kinabalu or Manado in North Sulawesi, where we are establishing already a direct connectivity flight? Where is Mindanao in terms of opportunity once Indonesia shall have completed its target in the next 5 to 7 years of transferring the capital of Indonesia from Jakarta, which is sinking already, to a city in central Kalimantan, which is just few hours away from Zamboanga via a direct flight. That's why prior to pandemic, you were supposed to launch with PAL Express, a direct Zamboanga Kota Kinabalu flight in May last year. But definitely that's going to be moved under different circumstances and a different schedule perhaps this time around given the realities of pandemic. But nonetheless, the commitment of the players in the airline industry remains optimistic of establishing the connectivity between Mindanao and the focus areas of BIMP-IAGA. And so with our shipping links, airports that will have to match the kind of airports and ports that our neighbors have within BIMP-IAGA. So we leverage many of our proposals in Mindanao, putting a color of BIMP-IAGA and ASEAN in the context so that the viability becomes bigger. In the same way as we are putting forward via an ADB-supported study, the viability of Mindanao being connected to Borneo in terms of submarine cable power interconnection, in line with the target by 2030 to 2050 of the ASEAN Master Plan for Connectivity, for all countries in ASEAN to be connected under one power grid. Unfortunately, Philippines is not connected in most of these countries in ASEAN. And the only way for the Philippines to be connected is via Mindanao. Hence, the identification under ASEAN One Power Grid of Borneo, Palawan, and Borneo, Mindanao submarine cable interconnection. We have to look at this over the long term. We cannot remain isolated in terms of connectivity, particularly for power, because our neighbors in Brunei, Indonesia, Malaysia are selling electricity at 3 times cheaper than how much we are paying our electric cooperatives and our distribution utilities here in Mindanao. So moving forward, as Philippines assumes chairmanship of BIMP-IAGA this year, we hope to be able to firm up framework of cooperation between Japan and South Korea this year. And that would translate to several windows of opportunities of technical assistance and funding for very specific projects within BIMP-IAGA, funded by our development partners such as Japan and South Korea. So what is in BIMP-IAGA essentially? Many are asking because they have not seen the strength of this sub-regional cooperation. The focus areas of BIMP-IAGA, meaning to say, not including the national capital or the large part of the 4 countries, except Brunei Darussalam, which is very much the entire country part of sub-regional cooperation. But BIMP-IAGA alone is a major player globally in terms of tree crops production, in terms of export of these major commodities. And so that if Mindanao is able to position itself along our neighbors such as Malaysia and Indonesia in terms of the exports of palm oil and rubber, for instance, among many other viable agricultural commodities, then we can penetrate bigger market destinations. And against the backdrop of pandemic, against all odds, a Sabah trade mission was launched last week, led by Tawi-Tawi Governor Sally and BARM Deputy Chief Minister or BARM Deputy Minister for Interior and Local Government, former Governor Ben Luong, embarked on a 4-day trade mission to Sabah with visits to many manufacturing companies in Sabah and Sandakan, and even the trading points of barter trade in Lahad Datu, to be able to revive, to strengthen the direct interaction, economic interaction against the restrictions of pandemic during this time, especially between Tawi-Tawi and the island provinces of Basilan, Sulu, and Tawi-Tawi and our trading partner in Malaysia, particularly Sabah. But again, we'd like to point out that this visit had been very much coordinated with the Department of Foreign Affairs, in line with the policy guidelines by the national government as it relates to Borneo policy or North Borneo policy. But what is essential to point out is that at the start of this year, BIMP-IAGA clusters had been deliberating about how to relax the borders so that our traders in Tawi-Tawi can resume their barter activities. Because of BIMP-IAGA, our barter traders in Tawi-Tawi are given due accommodation, very specific set of policies by the Bureau of Customs, so that it will allow them to get and trade commodities from across the border. Unfortunately, this is something that have yet to transition into a semi-formal level, which is a continuing discussion within BIMP-IAGA. But what is important to point out is even against the picture of pandemic still engulfing us, something good is happening in terms of positioning Tawi-Tawi as a major trading partner and part of the entire ecosystem of productivity by producing semi-value added commodities that are needed, as for instance, in Sabah and Sandakan. So this is essentially the main objective of that particular successful visit of the Tawi-Tawi delegation to Sabah last year. And the need to link all of this in terms of where do we go from here in terms of the power situation. Because our electricity in Mindanao in the last 7 years already mirrored the national average. We used to be having a lower, cheaper electricity rates. That's why we are able to attract locators, put up facilities in Mindanao. But today, we are already having a grid parity because 70% of our power supply in Mindanao is already derived from imported technology and fuel, such as coal, which, as we speak, is already on its skyrocketing level. And so expect, I guarantee you, that your electricity bills in the next few days will be higher from how much it was 3 months, 2 months ago because of the cost of fuel, oil, and coal in the global market today. And therefore, in Mindanao, we have to look at 10, 20 years down the road. We don't have to go through what we went through in 2010 when we had to go through rotating brownouts in Mindanao, 4 hours in Davao, 2 hours in some areas, 16 hours in Jensen and in Zamboanga, for instance, because of a 500 megawatts or 600 megawatts supply shortfall. But in 2015 and 2016, when power plants came online and started kicking in power to the grid, we sort of addressed that particular supply shortfall. But this is what we've seen the last 2 or 3 years, for instance. If you look at the screen, our power demand last year, October 19, 2020, was 1,794. As of yesterday or 2 days ago, our demand was already at 2,000 megawatts. So we're moving back to pre-COVID level, even against the backdrop of many hotels closed, operations reduced, economic activities lowered in many instances, yet our demand for power has been increasing. And so we're looking at between now and 2027 when Mindanao needs additional capacity to be able to address our growing demand. And so in terms of moving forward, apart from the usual default idea of big power plants being built somewhere else and connected to the grid, the approach should be distributed generation, where small power bite-sized capacities in the area where there are possible viable sources such as hydro, biomass, or potential for solar be established as embedded capacities of electric cooperatives and to power agricultural value adding. And this is where we are linking now some of the activities in terms of attracting, making agriculture sexy again by directly linking it to green technology. Because there's so much funding available right now from Green Climate Fund, Climate Adaptation Fund, insofar as the global approach towards adhering to the Paris Declaration and making available funding for several countries moving towards that energy transition. And MinDA's framework is tailored towards pursuing an energy transition, at least by 2030, achieving 50-50 energy mix. Going back to where we were 6 or 7 years ago, because today we are already 70-30 in favor of fossil technology. And the way to approach that is to look at directly linking agriculture with renewable energy, such as this project, which is ongoing now and hope to be completed by end of the year or early next year, is solar-powered, hybridized with battery in Sitangkay and Sibutu, so that electricity will be made available 24/7 to power not just lighting for homes, but to power water system, and water system not just for potable drinking supply, but water system to value-add sewage activity in these two towns of Sibutu and Sitangkay. We're building the business case for this for replicability in several other similarly situated areas later on. Another project which is being piloted in 10 communities in Mindanao, particularly under a program called Integration of Productive Uses of Renewable Energy, where solar-powered corn sheller, solar-powered abaca splending machine, solar-powered ice-making machine in specific fishing centers will have to be built to be able to increase value-adding of this commodity. And later on, add a labeling among the many other voluntary standards of global agricultural practices, Rainforest Alliance, add a value-adding and a labeling of 100% renewable energy produced commodity so that it can penetrate bigger markets. Providing 22 fish centers identified logistics facilities for ice making machines. And so we are anchoring this. I am on a remaining few slides On the strength of Mindanao, based on a study done by World Bank, particularly under the Mindanao Jobs Report, for which some of our eminent speakers had been part of on this particular study that was led before by then lead economist of World Bank and now NEDA Director General and Socioeconomic Planning Secretary Dr. Carl Chua, which cited that Mindanao's economy is driven by 60% agriculture value chain. And 6 out of 10 jobs in Mindanao is related to agriculture value chain. So if we wanted to bring back jobs that were lost and create more jobs in the rural areas moving forward, our direction should be value adding, expanding our agriculture development. An example of how we would want several other LGUs to look at in terms of approach later on is a business case we are now developing in Taraca. Taraca is a fourth-class municipality in Lanao del Sur that has been able to take out 200 million pesos loan from the Development Bank of the Philippines for the construction of 6 solar-powered irrigation and and water supply system to value-add agriculture productivity. An example of how LGUs in similarly situated areas can also take cue from in terms of presenting viable and bankable projects. And so linking again agriculture productivity, because this is the way forward in terms of economic recovery in Mindanao. And balance this and match this definitely with the kind of responsive budget that we had been advocating for Mindanao. In the last several administrations, in the last several years, as you can see on the screen, this is where we were and this is where we are now in terms of national budget to the total national budget share. We've definitely seen an increased allocation to Mindanao under this administration, especially for many of big ticket projects. But with the pandemic, getting into the picture of how much budget is allocated, this is something that we continue to work strongly with our partners in Congress, the Mindanao lawmakers, in terms of making sure that Mindanao do really get the kind of budget it deserves. Because in the build, as was highlighted earlier, many of these are yet to be completed this year, some yet to be completed in 2022, and some in 2023. And if there are no allocations by DBM in this multi-year project, then all of this will remain to be in the drawing board and will not see the light in terms of implementation, especially if there's going to be a transition of a new administration that looks differently in terms of trusts and priorities. And hence the need for us in Mindanao to continue this partnership along with all other sectors and agencies in terms of our convergence and our advocacy. And presenting to the incoming administration the roadmap that we all desire for Mindanao. Daghang salamat ug maayong buntag kanatong tanan.